King Charles III has more residences than any modern British monarch. But there was one huge... King Charles III has more residences than any modern British monarch. From spectacular castles and palaces to vast manors and rambling farmhouses, the King's property portfolio stretches all the way from John O'Groats to Land's End and beyond.
To us, these are some of the most impressive buildings in the country, but to Charles, they're home.
After 73 years preparing for the throne, Charles is now in charge of all these magnificent royal residences.
These are the properties that have shaped the king from when he was a little boy, and now it's his turn to shape them.
So now he's finally king of the castles. How is Charles going to shake things up?
Some of the changes he has made would have been unthinkable even under Elizabeth II.
He's opening up some of the properties which, up to now, have been very, very private.
He's making them cover their costs.
I could even, if I wanted to, stay in a bed and breakfast in a property owned by the king.
This is a monarch ripping up the royal rulebook.
I did think it was kind of crazy.
He's not doing this to win some royal popularity stake. He's doing this because he's always been a man with a mission.
But with the royal family's finances under pressure, how does it look for one man to have so many homes? And can he afford to keep them all?
Who, even a king, needs quite as many properties?
The King's property portfolio may be worth as much as £7 billion.
Now we're going to uncover the King's staggering property collection. Just how did he get so many houses? And what is he planning to do with them all to create a lasting legacy? When the newly crowned King and Queen greeted the crowds from the Buckingham Palace balcony in May 2023, they were following generations of royal tradition. But there was one huge difference. When they stepped back inside the palace, they weren't going home.
Charles and Camilla have never lived at Buckingham Palace.
Even though it's been the London residence of every monarch since Queen Victoria, Charles and Camilla haven't moved in, preferring for now to be in Clarence House just down the road. So is King Charles starting a royal revolution by becoming the first monarch in nearly 200 years to refuse to live at Buckingham Palace?
He has so many homes to choose from, but he's very fond of Clarence House, and he's flitting up and back between Windsor, between the places in Scotland that he loves so dearly as well.
The King has certainly got a lot of houses. Exactly how many depends on how you count them.
The king has a vast property portfolio, more than I think any other monarch before him.
It's a heck of a lot.
Before taking the throne, Charles and Camilla already had an astonishing 8 homes across the UK, as well as 2 cottages in Romania. And when he became king in September 2022, that number grew, as Charles also became the head of another vast collection of royal properties, including 6 grand residences where the monarch traditionally lives. 2 of them are private estates inherited from his mother, Sandringham House in Norfolk and Balmoral Castle in Scotland. And 4 are impressive official residences owned by the Crown: Holyrood House, Hillsborough Castle, Windsor Castle, and making at least 15 in total the property where Charles has chosen to start his royal revolution, Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace is the most valuable home in the world, thanks to its royal history, prime location, and gargantuan size.
It's impossible, I think, to put a market value on something like Buckingham Palace, but it is rumoured that a market value would be £3 billion.
The late Queen was once asked how many rooms there are in Buckingham Palace. I've no idea.
It's not surprising Her Majesty lost count. Buckingham Palace has 775 rooms, including a staggering 188 staff bedrooms, 92 offices, 78 bathrooms, 52 principal bedrooms, and 19 state rooms.
It's this huge complex. Within it is a swimming pool, You've got ATMs so people can get cash. You've got the staff canteens because they've got tons of people working there.
It has its own doctor's surgery, its own cinema, its own post office.
The palace is laid out in a quadrangle with a courtyard in the middle. The central block at the back, which overlooks the largest private garden in London, is where the grand state rooms are located.
The state rooms where foreign dignitaries and politicians meet with the royal family are the epitome of royal gilded grandeur.
The east front, that famous palace facade, also has elegant rooms for entertaining on the first floor, known as the principal floor. The very top floor, with windows half hidden under the pediment, is where staff members sleep. And the monarch has a separate self-contained apartment on the principal floor of the north side.
It's funny sort of calling it an apartment for the monarch, because it's actually, for most people, it's huge. I mean, it's like 25 rooms and several reception rooms.
For most of Charles's life, this was his parents' domain.
The king, in fact, was born in Buckingham Palace back in 1948.
And once his mother became queen 4 years later, Buckingham Palace was the family's London home. But Charles and his siblings slept away from their parents, on the nursery floor at the front of the palace.
It was the nanny kingdom, and it was his security, because he didn't see very much of his parents.
It was a very Edwardian childhood. He was brought up by nannies. It was very austere, I think.
Unlike earlier generations of royals, Charles was educated outside of the palace.
As a young boy, he went to a local prep school in London, but it was deemed inappropriate for him to do class swimming lessons at a public swimming bath. So the whole class trooped back to Buckingham Palace to use the swimming pool. It must have been quite a lonely and austere place, and I'm not surprised he's never wanted to move back in there.
The truth is that Buckingham Palace has always been too large and too busy to be a comfortable family home.
Buckingham Palace looks fabulous. It's got these great staterooms, but what it is a factory for the monarchy. Every square inch is packed full of activity.
This is Monarchy HQ, so it's full of employees organising every detail of royal life, as well as those who care for the museum-worthy collection within its walls.
There's hundreds of staff who work in Buckingham Palace, from the grooms who look after the horses in the Royal Mews, to the chefs, to the butlers who look after the porcelain in the pantry.
We did get a glimpse inside Buckingham Palace when a tabloid reporter posed as a member of staff.
There were some wonderful revelations, not harmful, really harmless, that the Queen and Prince Philip ate their breakfast out of Tupperware containers, and also the footman delivering breakfasts to some of the other members of the royal family who might have been there. They had a little map of where everything went on the tray, and they also had a map of how to get to the rooms.
In the same way, for the chambermaids, there's a picture of how the beds should be made, because certain members of the family like to have their beds made in different ways.
But even though the king was raised from birth being weighted on hand and foot, Buckingham Palace isn't an easy place to relax.
There isn't that distinction between private and public at Buckingham Palace that we all need after a hard day's work, including the king or queen.
And there's another reason why Charles and Camilla haven't moved in. The 200-year-old palace isn't exactly fit for purpose.
When President Obama was visiting, he was preparing a speech, and the First Lady Michelle, I think, was in their bedroom. And suddenly a footman comes bursting into the room, sort of rather sheepishly trying to catch a mouse.
And he said, well, don't tell her about it. Do not tell her. Because she obviously was going to be terrified.
In fact, there have been mounting problems with the 200-year-old palace for decades.
There were buckets to catch leaks in the picture gallery. Floorboards were creaking. It would take sort of one vigorous step and you'd be through them.
There was an investiture, and a great big chunk of masonry fell off the wall and practically hit one of the footmen who was standing there.
The royal family were left with no choice. In 2017, a 10-year, £369 million renovation of the entire palace began. Along with extensive structural works, including rewiring the entire palace, the interiors have been given a facelift. For King Charles, this has been the perfect opportunity to radically transform how Buckingham Palace is used.
King Charles is making a huge change at Buckingham Palace in that he's opening it up to the public more than he's ever done before.
Because so much of the royal collection is in these rooms and ready to be seen, the King wants to share those.
He's a king on a mission to create a more open and connected monarchy, and it starts here. Although some rooms in Buckingham Palace have long been open for tours, he's giving the public far more access to this historic building.
Crucially, Charles is a good businessman. As a revenue raiser, they have sold these sort of premium tickets to the East Front.
These £90 guided tours are the first time the public can see inside the room that's hidden behind net curtains when the family step onto the iconic balcony.
One time I did try and open the door just to see what the royals see, and I got chalked off by a footman. But you're not allowed out on the balcony, but you can certainly see the view down the Mall, which is amazing.
But King Charles's most revolutionary change at Buckingham Palace may be yet to come. Will the King and Queen reject centuries of royal tradition and refuse to move in when the 10-year renovation is complete?
By the time it finishes, he'll be nearly 80, Camilla's a little bit older. I can't see that they will want to move in wholesale to Buckingham Palace.
And it has been thought by governments, really, that this is where the monarch should be. And that was made very clear to the late Queen and Prince Philip. But I think things have changed.
I don't think the King and Queen will ever live in Buckingham Palace.
The King does use Buckingham Palace as the office, both for administrative work and hosting official events. But when it's time to go home, he prefers to head 350 metres along the Mall to his other London residence, the home he's already transformed in his own image, Clarence House. Clarence House is a 4-storey Georgian townhouse on the corner of St James's Palace. The £53 million residence has 5 large public rooms, several private sitting rooms and 7 family bedrooms, as well as accommodation for more than 30 staff members. There's also a 21-seat cinema in the basement.
Clarence House, I think, is quite a different setting to Buckingham Palace. It's quite cluttered. There are family pictures and signs of kind of family life within Clarence House, obviously on a grand scale because this is still the King and Queen, but it does feel more homely.
When Charles was Prince of Wales, Clarence House was his official London residence, and as King, he's shown no sign of wanting to move out.
Charles III inherited it from his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, when she died in 2002, and she had lived there for half a century. It's a place that he has a great deal of fondness for.
Charles loved his grandmother so much and spent very, very many happy days and evenings at Clarence House with her.
In the Queen Mother's time, Clarence House was a centre of social activity where she loved to entertain.
She used to have these wonderful parties and soirees.
But in a move that would later come to define his reign as king, when Charles moved in, he saw this royal retreat could do much more to earn its keep.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad to see so many of you here today squashed into this house.
He transformed the position of Clarence House to allow Clarence House to be used by, for example, Camilla, to further a lot of her charitable interests.
Camilla likes to host receptions there, and I've seen her there on engagements many times. She starts by coming down the stairs, and it's almost like, you know, she's at her own house. People have come in, and she comes down to welcome them.
Although Charles and Camilla use Clarence House for some official duties, it's always been their family home. For many years, it was also the London residence of Princes William and Harry.
They used to sneak in through the servants' quarters to make sure that Pa and Camilla never saw them. And of course, this did mean that then if they were sneaking people home as well, they could get in and out undetected.
But while Charles has thrown open the doors of Buckingham Palace to the eager public, at Clarence House, he's gone in the opposite direction. When he was Prince of Wales, paying visitors could tour the ground floor when the royals were away.
Since COVID, the house has never reopened, and I think that's because it is Charles's personal home.
Now as king, Charles has created a clear dividing line between his 2 London residences.
We've got to remember that the King and Queen are of a certain age. They are very comfortable at Clarence House. It's worked really well since the King came to the throne, that he has a place he lives and a place he works.
However, Buckingham Palace is still the heart, the official centre of royal protocol and royal responsibility, and that is the key. You have to keep that. There is an official purpose that Buckingham Palace serves, and it must continue to do that.
It's not just Buckingham Palace that fulfills this role. The monarch has 3 other official residences across the UK: Windsor Castle, Holyrood House in Scotland, and Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland.
They're not just homes, they're not just buildings. They kind of symbolise that global power that the British monarchy has in building form.
These are some of the most dazzling properties in the world, but they're also some of the most mysterious and misunderstood.
So how exactly does King Charles look after so many magnificent properties? And with all these homes to visit, how on earth does his entourage make sure they don't forget anything as he moves between them all?
It does look baffling as to how they end up in the right place at the right time with the right things.
King Charles has a staggering number of royal residences. He has castles and palaces up and down the UK and is constantly on the move between them.
Charles moves a lot more from property to property than the late Queen did. He's grown fond of Windsor Castle. He often stays there on a Thursday and a Friday, and then he'll go to Highgrove for the weekend, and then he'll come back to Windsor Castle on a Sunday before going back into London to stay at Clarence House.
Continuously travelling between so many homes can be quite the logistical puzzle. So just how does the King live in so many different places?
From the outside, it does look baffling how they manage to end up in the right place at the right time with the right things.
There are staff at every residence and home who are always there. And then he has a small coterie of staff who always travel with him.
The chefs travel, the footmen travel too, the dressers travel too, the valets do.
There'll be spreadsheets within the palace so they know where everything is, and it's all works like clockwork.
The monarch's schedule is planned long in advance, so every location can be prepared just as Charles likes it. And the King has long been known for his high standards.
I've been told in the past that a van has been sent in advance with an orthopaedic mattress and a new toilet seat, and even he'll replace the artwork, or his staff will replace the artwork in a bedroom that he's going to be staying in, just so that he can be with Charles' seal of approval.
On one occasion, his favourite loo seat was left behind. They sent a car down to Highgrove to pick the loo seat up and take it back up to Scotland.
Nowadays, the nearly 500 staff who work at the royal residences make sure he has exactly the same things waiting for him at each of his homes.
So, for instance, at Highgrove, at Sandringham, at Burke Hall, he'll have his gardening coat.
He has a desk set up, wherever that desk may be. He'll have all his things laid out as it would be, back in London.
His gin martini is kept in every house. So at 7 o'clock sharp, he can have his half vermouth, half gin martini done exactly the way he likes it.
But while Charles's routine stays the same at every home, the properties themselves couldn't be more different. Ranging from cosy farmhouses to some of the grandest stately homes in the country. And the most magnificent of all the King's houses is by far the oldest and largest, Windsor Castle. About 20 miles outside of London, overlooking the River Thames, Windsor Castle, valued at nearly £500 million, is the King's official place in the country.
I love it. I do love it when I go there. You can feel the history of it. It's 1,000 years old, more than that. It's got 1,000 rooms. It's a wonderful, proper job castle.
You can often see Prince William sometimes going around on a kind of scooter to get from one part to another, I think, because that's how big it is.
Windsor Castle's splendour was on full display as the unforgettable setting for Prince Harry's wedding to Meghan Markle in May 2018.
The day of Harry and Meghan's wedding was the most beautiful I've ever seen Windsor look.
That was a glitz and glamour day for Windsor. There was global attention on the castle.
There was 600 guests in St George's Chapel. There was Oprah Winfrey. There was George and Amal Clooney.
Thousands of people turned out throughout Windsor and along the Long Walk to get a glimpse of them going by in their carriage. It was a gorgeous day. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and the backdrop of this ancient castle against this modern marriage, it was the perfect setting.
Windsor's gargantuan size and impressive royal history also make it the top choice for King Charles to host state visits, while Buckingham Palace is being renovated.
Windsor is much more splendid than Buckingham Palace. The banquets are always more flamboyantly staged.
It's really, really special in St George's Hall at Windsor Castle. Absolutely wonderful.
The long table in St George's Hall seats 160 guests. It takes 8 people 3 weeks to polish the 200-year-old 4,000-piece dinner service before the table is set with military precision.
Everything is measured to the centimetres. Every guest has 46 centimetres. That's it. That's your lot.
There are heads of state in the world today who greatly treasure coming to the United Kingdom. And I think Windsor Castle will be a setting and a moment that will always be remembered.
But for King Charles, Windsor isn't just a glamorous backdrop for major events. Unlike Buckingham Palace, he really feels at home there and likes to be there 2 or 3 days a week.
It is quite welcoming in a way that you might not typically expect. I remember the Bidens going to visit the late Queen and sitting down and saying how homely it was, and the Queen said, "Let me be mother," and poured tea for them all.
It might be cosy in the royal apartments, but living in an ancient castle does bring some modern problems.
Staff have told me that sometimes they lose the Wi-Fi at Windsor Castle because the walls are so thick that the signal doesn't get through. Not a problem, I suspect, for the late Queen, but it would be a problem for the current King.
But for King Charles, Windsor Castle does have one big advantage over all his other properties.
I think one reason that Charles is spending a fair bit of time at Windsor these days is that he's delightfully close to William and Catherine and the children.
The Prince and Princess of Wales live in Adelaide Cottage in the castle grounds.
You can pop across to Adelaide Cottage to see Louis, Charlotte and George, or more likely, they will go and see him at Windsor Castle.
Another reason the King likes spending time at Windsor is that the ancient castle is brimming with royal history.
He's a great romantic, and it appeals to his romantic nature.
When you see the buttresses and the wonderful gargoyles and the splendid beasts that line along the roof, you get a sense of the history that is encapsulated in the crown and for his lifetime is carried by the King.
Keeping the ancient castle running means preserving some archaic jobs it's unlikely to see anywhere else.
Some of the roles in Windsor Castle are truly unique. It still has 300 fireplaces. There is a fender smith whose job it is to keep a track of these 300 fireplaces, to go round and make sure all are in working order.
There are 450 clocks, and they all have to be changed by hand.
There are 3, I think, people employed to turn the clocks back, and it takes them 16 hours to alter them every spring and every autumn.
And the clocks in the kitchen at Windsor Castle are always kept 5 minutes fast, just to make sure the monarch's food is always on the table in time.
And more than any of his other homes, Windsor reminds Charles that he's just one of nearly 40 monarchs who have lived within its walls.
King Henry VIII is buried in the vaults there. Charles I is buried in the vaults there. And of course, Queen Elizabeth II is buried there, as are her parents.
I think it kind of grounds him that he's one of many in a weird kind of way. I think he quite likes the fact he's one in a successive line of monarchs.
Charles has known Windsor all his life, and it's helped shape the king he has become.
It was said that as a young boy he was given history lessons by his governesses by simply walking from room to room in Windsor. And it's a love of history, of culture that has never left Charles.
Charles used to love rummaging through the library.
He discovered a cache of Leonardo da Vinci drawings in the Royal Library, and he was so excited.
And he apparently absolutely loved them, and then went back to go and tell his family what he'd found, and he was so diverted. And he was met with kind of slight bafflement and bemusement.
I think that's a real shame. But I think it just makes him now able to put his own mark in these wonderful historic places without having any ridicule or any questioning from any of the royal family.
While Windsor is full of childhood memories for Charles, across the Irish Sea, there's another grand royal residence he's now in charge of that he doesn't know as well. The royal family's official residence in Northern Ireland, Hillsborough Castle. Hillsborough isn't actually a castle at all. It's an 18th century aristocratic house surrounded by 100 acres of magnificent grounds.
It's rather splendid, in fact. Only been a royal residence, I think, since the 1970s. So there were many years during the Troubles when it was thought not safe for British royals to visit or stay the night.
Fortunately, by Charles's accession in 2022, the peace process had held for more than 20 years. He made his first visit to the £80 million residence as king just days after taking the throne, and Charles has wasted no time in putting his mark on this historic property.
He loves Hillsborough, and it is a gem.
Although it's shared with government officials and managed by historic royal palaces, Charles still wants to leave a personal imprint throughout.
Now the king has put so much of himself back into that place, and he has taken personal interest in the garden and how it's evolved, and in the redecoration of the rooms. It's become one of the king's treasures of kingship, that he can now do what he likes with it and turn it into, I think, a much warmer and happier place.
It's no wonder Charles has grown so fond of his Northern Irish home. He's always been keen to visit all four corners of his realm. He particularly likes spending time in Scotland, where he has an incredible 5 properties, including one that's been a royal residence since Tudor times, the Palace of Holyrood House. Holyrood House, valued at around £60 million, sits at the bottom of the Royal Mile in Edinburgh.
It is full of historic stories, and this royal palace, I think, is the most beautiful of all of them because of its setting.
Every year, the King and Queen spend the summer in Scotland, starting with a week of official duties at this 289-room palace.
As the governor of Edinburgh Castle, I always used to greet the king on his arrival in Scotland. The king tends to come up and take residence there at the end of June and at the beginning of July, and events like the Order of the Thistle are celebrated, garden parties are held, and also investitures.
The fact that the monarch stays there, and that's the headquarters of the monarchy, for a week every June, that's very, very important to the United Kingdom.
It's thought the King and Queen stay in the private royal apartments on the second floor of the south and east wings, where Charles has been busy putting his personal stamp on the property.
He wants to maintain it, he wants to evolve it, he wants to protect its fabric and enhance its art.
But because Holyrood is an official residence owned by the state, it's not so simple for Charles to make the dramatic changes he would like. Luckily, he's less restricted at other properties in his extensive portfolio, and we'll discover how he's ripping up the royal rulebook at some of them.
Some of the changes he has made would have been unthinkable even under Elizabeth II.
Charles has only been king since 2022, but he has already made remarkable changes across the royal residences.
The king is someone who has an immense interest in and respect for heritage and conservation, yet he is also someone who's been prepared to rip up the royal rulebook in order to make sure that property portfolio is in fighting good shape in the 21st century.
But at some places, it's easier for the king to make changes than others. The official residences, like Buckingham Palace and Windsor, are where he conducts the business of state.
So investitures, giving people their knighthoods or their OBEs or CBEs, audiences with politicians.
Think of the king as the ultimate civil servant, and these big palaces, these are symbols of United Kingdom.
And with their role for the nation, every change he wants to make at these properties has to be approved by committee. But the king has other homes that are his personal property, and there he has more freedom to put his ideas into action.
When Charles has a plan, when he has an idea, he acts on it very quickly.
At one of his personal homes, Charles was so keen to get going, he started making changes before he became king. In the process, creating a model for everywhere else. Sandringham House in Norfolk. Sandringham belongs to the royal family personally, not the state. It was built in 1869 for the future King Edward VII, Queen Victoria's oldest son. With more than 100 rooms and 20,000 acres of land, it's now worth an estimated £60 million.
It's this lovely sort of Jacobean-looking property, close to a lake, surrounded by trees, very mature trees, sweeping lawns.
Certainly, during my time being associated with the British royal family, it was a residence that they particularly enjoyed, I think because of its architecture, because of its location, because of its isolation, really, and, the fun and the history that went with it.
In a few short years, the king has transformed Sandringham's appearance.
The king has done much to break up the lawns into more beautiful vistas of trees and other things, which, he just loves doing.
Charles had a radical eye on Sandringham long before he became king, taking over the estate when his father retired in 2017.
He made Sandringham organic, and I think even Prince Philip was sort of rolling his eyes and thinking, oh gosh, do we have to do this? But Charles saw the way that the future was going, and he was very passionate about doing that.
But despite his dramatic changes to Sandringham's farmland, King Charles is a great lover of royal tradition, and he's shown no sign of changing the family custom of celebrating Christmas at Sandringham.
The royal family used to spend Christmas at Windsor Castle, actually, but back in the 80s, because Windsor was having some rewiring or renovation work going on. They switched to Sandringham, and that has now become an absolute tradition.
However, it's likely that under King Charles, Christmas dinner at Sandringham is more elaborate than it was in his mother's time.
He and his mother used to have arguments about the way of decorating Sandringham. Charles is much more extravagant, and he liked a lot of floral arrangements.
What I remember were the sort of weekend shooting parties the king, then the Prince of Wales, would hold in November. On all these occasions, that different sets of silverware, different sets of china were drawn out from the basement. Many of these sets going back 300-400 years.
Although it is the king's private home, it's possible to get a glimpse of Sandringham's treasures. 8 of the ground floor rooms have been open for tours since 1977. But Charles is taking much bigger steps to share the property with the public.
Charles is keen to kind of open up his private residences. We saw him hosting Zelensky for a meeting recently at Sandringham.
It's not just world leaders who are being welcomed to Sandringham. 30,000 music fans can now come to watch megastars like Robbie Williams performing in the grounds.
I think this is a really good, positive move by Charles on 2 fronts. It's great PR, and it's great to raise more money.
By making his personal properties earn their keep, Charles is finding a way to respond to critics who say it's too extravagant for a monarch to have so many homes.
I think Charles is well aware that people might look at him and think, who, even a king, needs quite as many properties? And so he's trying to cut costs, basically.
It's part of what the royal family realized they need to do to become much more relevant in the 21st century.
Nowhere is this radical opening up of the royal homes more evident than at the king's other privately owned estate, Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Balmoral Castle was built by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in the 1850s and has been a royal favourite ever since.
Balmoral, to my view, is almost like a fairy tale castle. It's nestled amongst these hills, and honestly, it looks like something out of Disney, I think.
Now worth around £50 million, the Royal Balmoral Estate covers 50,000 acres of stunning countryside.
Balmoral isn't a huge castle. You might expect it to be bigger, bearing in mind who lives there, but it was designed by Albert to be a family home, and many of the bedrooms don't have bathrooms, so it's very basic in its own way.
And now that he's king, Charles has decided to share this beloved family home with the public, welcoming paying visitors into Balmoral's inner sanctum for the first time in royal history.
Now there's a special tour of Balmoral where you see some of the private rooms used by the late Queen, and you get a real feeling of the fact that this is where she loved to be.
It's even said Charles has taken a personal interest in what visitors see on the tour.
I think he's gone through some of those effects that are there at Balmoral and brought some of them out. So there are things that belonging to Queen Victoria, for example. You really get a sense of looking around, that you're not just looking around an old fusty castle, but you're actually stepping in history.
A private tour of Balmoral isn't cheap, costing more than £100 per person. And the King has introduced several other ways of raising revenue at Balmoral.
If you want to have a meal there, it's sort of £250, or Sunday lunch, I think it's £25.
They've applied for a wedding licence, and so people will be able to get married. You can say, I got married at Balmoral. I mean, not actually in the castle, but you don't know how to add that bit, do you?
The wedding would actually take place in one of the 150 other buildings dotting the vast Balmoral estate.
Balmoral Estate is 50,000 acres. It's huge. I mean, it's basically its own ecosystem. So you've got lakes, you've got valleys, you've got grouse moors, you've got gardens. It's huge. And I think that's why the royal family have always loved it.
As a child, Charles adored the family summer holidays there, where the royal rules were more relaxed.
They would go for walks, and there would be kind of bonfires and all the stuff that they didn't have the freedom and the space to do elsewhere. It could all happen at Balmoral.
Later, Charles brought his own children for holidays on the vast estate.
It was a paradise for young children because of the freedom, the expanse of it, and all that went with it. You know, the countryside, the barbecues that had happened there. It was everything that a young child would enjoy.
I remember there was one instance where Prince Harry and William used to talk about just squeezing the mustard on the the burgers and things like that they had, and Prince Philip coming up behind them and kind of doing that, and it's sort of shooting up and hitting the ceiling.
And Balmoral is also the place where the King's passion for nature began to grow.
And I think, just seeing the vastness of the landscape also made him realise that actually, there's a huge world and all this environment needs to be taken care of. And that's where all of this grew with him. And that love for Balmoral has just stuck with him.
But there's one place on the Balmoral estate where the King's open-door policy doesn't apply. His very personal retreat, Birkhall. Birkhall is just 6 miles from Balmoral Castle, but it couldn't be more different.
The castle is austere and cold and drafty, but Birkhall is very much a home. It's like a big 19th century farmhouse. And I would say it's definitely Charles and Camilla's favourite home.
They have made it cosy and lovely, and they can I just think that they feel they're a long way away from their official duties there.
Birkhall is one of Charles and Camilla's most private homes. It's never been open to the public, and only their closest friends are invited through the gates.
For Charles and Camilla, it's a special place for them as a couple. We understand this is where they got engaged, it's where they spent their honeymoon. It's something that it allows them to kind of pull up the drawbridge, if you like, to the outside world and say, no, this is just our time.
It's perfectly understandable that he would want a place that is just his. Kingship is a very lonely place. You can't share it with anybody. You have to find a place and a comfort in yourself when you can be alone. And I think Birkhall has, more than any other house, provided that for him.
Charles inherited Burke Hall in 2002 from his grandmother, the Queen Mum.
He had this very deep bond with his grandmother, and I think he likes to keep every element of her connection alive. In fact, in the very entrance of Burke Hall, he still has his grandmother's coat and hat, sat there as though she's ready to take them out for a walk.
In the Queen Mother's time, Burke Hall was far from a grand royal residence.
I remember the carpet being relatively threadbare. It had that old granny feel about it, but something that was lived in. And I think that's what actually the king himself found very reassuring and very warming.
When King Charles, moved in, he wanted to retain that traditional character, but he rejuvenated it and refreshed it and then, brought certain things up to date.
Burke Hall is one of 3 homes that Charles inherited from the Queen Mum. There's also the Castle of May on the northern tip of the Scottish mainland, as well as Clarence House in London. He's loved these places all his life, and they've helped shape the man and monarch he has become. But the house that has shaped Charles more than any other had no royal connection at all until he moved in, and it now embodies everything he stands for.
It is Charles. It is Charles in a building, really.
So how did Charles take a rundown manor house and turn it into one of the most admired royal residences? King Charles has been busy transforming the royal property portfolio, but at many places he's only just getting started.
When he stays in any of these houses, he will walk round, he'll do some gardening, he'll even pick up bits of rubbish, but he'll look at these landscapes and say, how could this be improved?
This passion for improvement is part of Charles's personality. He's always been focused on putting his ideas into practice to prove to others and himself that they really do work.
He's a stickler for detail. He follows through on his ideas. He doesn't just throw money at them. He believes passionately in these projects.
And there's one particular place where this deep-rooted aspect of his character first came to life. Highgrove, his countryside retreat in Gloucestershire. Charles bought the 9-bedroom Georgian manor house and its attached farm for £865,000 back in 1980, when he was still Prince of Wales.
Charles bought Highgrove precisely because there was a blank slate. He could put his own mark on it.
At the time, it was an unimpressive, gloomy building, surrounded by neglected lawns.
By the time he was romancing Lady Diana Spencer, she used to go to Highgrove, and Charles would show her around. She thought, this is a dump. This is the future king, and this is a dump.
Over the years, Charles transformed Highgrove into a stunning family home, now worth an estimated £30 million.
I think he found the original house at Highgrove a bit stark, and so he added some columns, he added a balustrade. He made it look a bit more fancy, I suppose.
It's very, very impressive now. I remember when I walked in there, I remember being struck by this huge table in the central hallway. And of course, the walls absolutely covered in gorgeous paintings from the royal collection.
There was a personality there. There was a homely atmosphere. It didn't have the vastness of Balmoral. It didn't have the turrets, of Windsor. It was like any other house.
Highgrove was Charles's first opportunity to build somewhere exactly the way he wanted it, testing out the ideas he'd later bring to the fore as king, even if his approach was considered rather unorthodox.
At the time, many thought he was mad doing all this organic gardening when no one else was doing it.
There is still a prejudiced misconception in certain circles that people concerned about the environment and what happens to this earth are bearded, besandaled, shaven-headed mystics.
He was lampooned in the media as someone who talked to plants when he was talking about environmental concerns. But that hasn't bothered him.
For Charles, Highgrove was somewhere he could prove his critics wrong. So he decided to put his reputation on the line and open the gates to let the public see what he had created.
Here at Highgrove, what you walked through this afternoon, is the result of 30 years of trying to recreate a lost habitat.
He wanted to share what he had learnt, and there were so many stories of people wandering around the gardens when he was in residence, and he would be in the garden. He would be gardening with his secateurs to hand, chopping away, or with some loppers, chopping something.
It's been a labour of love over 40 years, and he's made the gardens absolutely stunning, but quite revolutionary in lots of ways.
Today, Highgrove welcomes nearly 40,000 visitors every year, although the house itself remains private, which was a good thing for his sons, William and Harry, when they lived there as teens.
I don't think there was much oversight of William and Harry when they were teenagers at Highgrove.
I remember once that William wanted 4 go-karts to race in the grounds of Highgrove. So William set himself up with his friends and designed the Highgrove Grand Prix. Well, after 4 or 5 laps of that, on a cold, damp day, there was quite a bit of collateral damage, both in the vegetable garden and in the wildflower meadow.
I do feel desperately sorry for Charles being a single dad, obviously, after the death of their mother. But you do kind of think, was he not... I don't think he had any idea what William and Harry were getting up to, either down the local pub or in Club H, which was their kind of basement drinking den.
The little get-togethers that Harry would have at Highgrove, I think, were fairly legendary among his friends.
Today, Highgrove is a hub for a different kind of social gathering. The King hosts charity events and fundraisers in a purpose-built venue in the gardens.
This is what he stands for, to be the convening king, bringing people together, and also to erode that boundary with the public, to try to bring the public closer to the monarchy and to make it less austere.
Highgrove personifies Charles, the man, his ideals, his ideas, his principles, his likes and dislikes, in a way that no other house does.
If Highgrove embodies everything King Charles stands for, then just 15 minutes away, there is a home that is all Queen Camilla. The one place that's truly hers, Raymill House. Camilla bought Raymill in 1995, paying £850,000 for the 6-bedroom house on 17 acres.
It's kind of her refuge. She lives a lot of the time, a very public, formal life, very grand. And Raymill, she can be absolutely herself.
It's where she can be Camilla the grandmother, Camilla the mother. Her son and daughter and her 5 grandchildren will pile in for Sunday lunch. She'll cook a lovely roast chicken. She'll kick her shoes off, have as many glasses of wine as she wants.
After more than 20 years of marriage, and with another of their many properties just around the corner, it might seem strange that Charles and Camilla have kept this private retreat at all. But Raymill is also about Charles protecting his beloved queen for the future.
I think it's long-term planning. So if Camilla outlives him, he has therefore secured Raymill as somewhere that she can go and be the Dowager Queen.
And that concern for Camilla's peaceful retirement has even been applied to the surrounding area. Recently, the King spent £3 million of his personal funds to buy the house next door to Raymill, the Old Mill.
Privacy is a real luxury for the royal family, and they guard it as best they can. So if Charles felt that Camilla's privacy was going to be invaded by having a new resident at the end of the road, he just wanted to do something about that.
It's clear that even at their most personal homes, the King is always looking for ways to evolve and improve the properties. And across his huge portfolio, Charles has found extraordinary ways to raise revenue that break the royal mould. Now, in some of his houses, not only can you get a peek at a royal bedroom or two, you can even stay the night.
I think you might even be able to sleep in his bedroom.
And coming up, we'll find out exactly where that is. The King and Queen's property portfolio is worth billions of pounds. But how many of these residences do they really own? And how do they pay for the upkeep? Well, like anything to do with royal finances, it's complicated. The official residences are owned by the Crown. Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Holyrood House are paid for by the sovereign grant, the King's official income, and Hillsborough is funded by historic royal palaces.
You can see a clean difference between the official residences that belong to the nation and yet to the King through the Crown, and the private buildings that belong to the King because he is a private person.
The King is responsible for the upkeep of those private residences. Balmoral and Birk Hall in Scotland, and Sandringham House in Norfolk. One reason he's keen to raise revenue at these homes. The King and Queen also personally own Ray Mill, and now its neighbour, the Old Mill. But even though it's Charles's most personal home, Highgrove isn't actually his.
Well, Highgrove is technically belonging to the Duchy of Cornwall, so Prince William, but there is agreement in place that obviously Dad can stay.
The Duchy of Cornwall funds the Prince of Wales, so William also now owns Charles's houses in Cornwall and Wales. And in Scotland, things get even more complicated. Two of Charles's Scottish properties, Dumfries House and the Castle of May, are run by trusts, and so designed to be independent of both royal and state ownership.
So they are run to pay for themselves, but Charles is still the patron and main trustee.
As the head of those trusts, Charles can't help but still be involved with what happens there. These residences have provided a testing ground for his rather radical approach to royal property management, particularly his home on the very northern tip of Scotland, the Castle of May. The Castle of May is one of the homes Charles inherited from his grandmother. He still visits this remote little castle for about a week every year.
The Queen Mother bought it when she was freshly widowed and restored it. I mean, it's pretty wild, which meant that she could have some pretty wild parties there because she had complete privacy.
The King does treasure it because I think he remembers his visits there. It was always a place of fun. And I think the King knows that that was how the house was and wants to just keep it as a place that people can enjoy.
After his grandmother's death, Charles threw himself into a bold plan to share her Highland hideaway with the general public in all the most lucrative ways possible.
If you've got money and a few friends and you fancy staying in a royal residence, you can go and rent it out.
The former granary, for instance, became a luxury B&B. The captain's house in the estate became a self-catering accommodation that could be rented out.
It's a really interesting way to get in touch with the royal property and spend some time in Scotland at a place that the King loves.
With a room in the granary starting at around £250 a night, a truly regal dining experience offered at £595 per person, an exclusive hire of the castle available at £50,000 a weekend, the Castle of May is now a successful commercial venture.
Charles has really broken the mold of how we view modern monarchs, because he's a modern monarch come businessman.
The opening up of estates to paying guests is something that the Castle of May has provided a very, very successful blueprint for.
In fact, it's a plan of action Charles started rolling out across the Duchy of Cornwall properties when he was still Prince of Wales. At the other end of Britain, near the south coast of Cornwall, is Restamel Manor. It's a 9-bedroom residence, complete with swimming pool and tennis court, as well as several cottages in the grounds available as holiday lets.
Restamel Manor in Cornwall is another great example of the King opening up the properties to fund themselves.
It's very tastefully done. It's somewhere you can get a slice of royal life for those who are prepared to pay for it.
The manor can sleep 18 people, and it's not exactly cheap to hire, something that didn't deter the Middleton family back in 2010.
The Middletons rented Restamel Manor one Christmas New Year period. William, I don't think, was there, but when inquiries were made as to whether the Middletons got a discount, since Catherine was just about to marry into the royal family, absolutely not came the response. They paid exactly the same as everybody else.
Well, business is business.
But luckily for avid royal holidaymakers, the royal family has plenty of other properties available to hire. There are cottages to rent at Balmoral and Sandringham, as well as holiday lets across the UK. And until recently, the King also had a property in Wales. As Prince of Wales, Charles searched for the perfect property for his Welsh visits for decades. Finally, in 2007, he found Cloyne ny Welmod, a £1.2 million farmhouse in the Brecon Beacons that was everything he was looking for.
When Prince Charles saw Cloyne ny Welmod for the first time in 2007, he apparently fell in love with it. It is a beautiful part of Wales. The scenery around it is gorgeous.
I think it was quite homely. It's very quaint. You know, it pleases him aesthetically.
But just like with the Castle of May, even 20 years ago, here in Wales, the future king was dropping clues as to what he would be doing with the wider property portfolio once he took over.
2 cottages were built in the grounds to immediately start renting them out. So you see there's even an eye in 2007 to making properties self-funding and self-sustaining.
It's something that's always been at the forefront of King Charles's mind. But as the number of properties in his large portfolio has grown, he knows it's not good business or good PR to keep a property he won't have time to visit as king. So Charles gave up his lease on Cloyne ny Welmod in 2023, making it the only one of his properties that he has officially let go of as monarch.
Even though the king isn't staying there anymore, there's still a new lease of life for the house because it's going to be used as a place where they can have art exhibitions and things like that. So interestingly, it's still within the kind of remit of the king's interests.
King Charles has tried to inject a new lease of life and income into as many of the properties he has dotted around the British Isles as possible. But the borders of his kingdom haven't limited his commercial ambitions.
Charles fell in love with Romania, specifically Transylvania, many, many years ago. So he bought a property. In fact, he bought 2 properties out there.
They might be more than 1,000 miles from the rest of his portfolio, but the distance hasn't stopped the king from applying the same principles to his houses in this little-known area of Eastern Europe.
One of them he has transformed into an arts centre, and the other one has been open for hire for many years.
I think you might even be able to sleep in his bedroom, I'm not quite sure.
So even if you prefer to leave the UK for a holiday, you can still spend it in one of the king's houses. Just as long as you don't cross over with Charles's annual visit, of course.
He absolutely loves it there. It's like a retreat where he can absolutely get away from everything else in his life for maybe a week or a few days.
He apparently was absolutely delighted to discover from a local that he is distantly descended from Vlad the Impaler, who was one of the inspirations for the legend of Count Dracula.
Charles, however, has focused on being a much more open, compassionate ruler than his gruesome, distant relative.
King Charles has raised royal commercialism to completely new heights. But his heart has always been in the right place.
As well as helping to look after the properties themselves, the money from these ventures goes into helping the local community.
Every time I have been to those locations, people have just spoken so movingly of how much he's given back to the local area, and I think that's quite important. It's not just another house for him to go and have his gin martini. He really does believe in being a good kind of local patron.
Making sure his properties support the wider area is a huge part of King Charles's revolutionary plan for a more open monarchy. And there's one place that shows how he connects with the public better than any other.
It's almost like if you could imagine King Charles designing his own Disneyland.
Even if buying it nearly ruined Charles completely.
It did nearly bankrupt him.
With his sweeping changes across the royal residences, King Charles has demonstrated what really matters to him as king: taking care of the planet, protecting history, and helping the public get a little bit closer to the crown. And at the same time, he's turning a commercial eye towards making these properties pay their way. And there's one royal residence that really showcases everything Charles hopes to achieve as monarch: little-known Dumfries House in Scotland. This 18th century Palladian mansion first drew Charles's attention when the house and all its contents, including a world-class collection of Chippendale furniture, were put up for sale in 2007.
Charles knew that it would probably be turned into something like a golf course, and he wanted to save that history.
He saw that here was an important slice of the heritage where he could really save something, could save a very historic house and its contents, and then build something.
I think it was really a rescue mission, you know, like rescuing a lost puppy or something.
But with an asking price of £45 million, even the then Prince of Wales couldn't afford this extensive estate outright.
It was very, very expensive, 45 million, and he was trying to put this consortium together to buy it because he didn't have the funds out of his personal wealth.
But the saying goes that once Charles sets his mind on accomplishing something, then he doesn't let any obstacle stand in the way.
In fact, Charles was so certain that this was the right thing to do that he used his own charitable foundation to help secure a £20 million loan. The sale came right down to the wire.
The Chippendale furniture had been put in a van and was being, sent down the motorway to London to be auctioned off at one of the big auction houses.
And at the very last moment, he managed to scrape together the money.
And the lorry was stopped and turned round, sent back up the motorway to Scotland.
It was a dramatic beginning for a huge project that has seen Dumfries House restored to its full glory.
I have to say at the time, I did think it was kind of crazy that he had done this, but I've been there myself and it's absolutely stunning.
He's done a lot both in the house and in the landscape.
He has renovated it and lovingly restored the Chippendale furniture that was there. There's gold leaf on some of the ceilings.
There was a walled garden which was almost derelict. So he's come in and he's really changed it.
It's almost like if you could imagine King Charles designing his own Disneyland, that's Dumfries House.
But Charles's goal at Dumfries was always more than just saving the house and garden.
What I also wanted to do when I came was, having looked at the area, discovered what all the different problems were, tackle each of these things one after the other.
Dumfries House is set among some of the most deprived areas of Scotland, and Charles really wanted to invest money to give the people of the surrounding areas something to hope for.
Today, the Dumfries estate has become a centre for job training and life skills classes.
Craftsmanship courses, textiles courses. He's got hospitality courses that are being run. This is all through his foundation, his charitable foundation.
And I think the community, far from feeling, he's bought another property, what's he doing, actually really appreciate that he has made it work for the local area.
For Charles, this is what a lifetime of work has built up to.
Really, at Dumfries House, you see all the ideas he'd been working on, his ideas about architecture, about conservation, about keeping old heritage crafts going.
He's brought it all together. It's his vision, and it's proving a great success.
King Charles waited 73 years to ascend the throne, and he knows his time in charge is limited. So it's no surprise that he's been so quick to make changes across the royal map. Each royal residence has brought different challenges, but also huge opportunities to shape the monarchy in his own image.
I certainly think that history and art is very important to Charles, and he feels that these grand country houses shouldn't just be sold to any oligarch who's got enough cash to buy them. I think it's important for him that people still live there and enjoy them, but that there should be a sort of continuum of history.
I think that Charles is really proud of his portfolio of properties.
But questions remain. With so many royal residences spread across all four corners of the United Kingdom and beyond, can Charles really afford to maintain this vast property empire? And how does it actually look to be a monarch with this many royal homes to his name?
The world in which many of these properties came into being as necessary or wanted has long since vanished. Some of that is simply a changed attitude towards monarchy, not just in Britain, but across the world.
It is also a sign of royal privilege, of extreme wealth. These estates must be much more than just the playgrounds of the rich and famous.
And so it's on the decisions that King Charles makes across all his royal properties that his legacy really lies.
The king is absolutely steeped in service to the kingdom. It's not about himself. And his legacy is to make these places better. He's making them more environmentally friendly, making them cover their costs.
We've seen him opening them up to the public, him trying to blur that boundary between monarchy and the public to bring them closer together.
It is a living legacy, and I think it's a legacy which, when we look back in, say, 50 years' time, everyone will say, yeah, that was definitely a King Charles moment.
In this way, King Charles can rest assured the royal property map will survive for generations to come. This isn't just a royal legacy, it's a legacy for all of us.